Okay.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully this has got everyone that was in my personal meeting room, as well as everyone who was here originally. I'm really, really sorry. Classic. Of course, I screwed up for my first proper Zoom thing. If I could ask everyone except for Imogen and yes, correct, Becky. Thank you. Thank you for being enthusiastic about the screw up. Yeah, everyone except for Imogen, Susannah and me to be on mute for now. And how it's going to work is I'm going to chat to Susannah and Imogen for until about 1 o'clock. And then we've got 15 minutes or so for you all to ask questions. So if you want to ask a question, what I'd ask is if you raise your hand, which I've just discovered you can do by if you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions button. You click on that and that shows various reactions, which you should feel free to do at any time, so long as you only do the positive ones. But you can also raise your hand. So at that point, I will ask whoever I've decided that. Thank you, Stefan. I will ask, can you see each other's reactions, or am I the only person who can see that? Okay, everyone can see that. That's great. So I will ask whoever I've decided is going to be the lucky person who's going to be able to ask the question to unmute themselves, because as we've just seen, it's probably a disaster if I decide to start trying to unmute people. We'll just take it from there, and hopefully it will all work. There's a few people still joining, but I think let's just get going, since I've wasted 5 minutes of everyone's time already. So very sorry about that, but thank you all for being very understanding, and next time I'll be less useless. Right, so without further ado, let me introduce Imogen and Susannah, co-founders of the brilliant Make Space for Girls group, which they set up, and they will tell you all about that. So Susannah is an author and a former TV producer who is outraged, as you would be, when she realized that not only had her local council only provided outdoor facilities for teenage boys, they didn't propose to do anything about it either. Imogen worked as a lawyer for many years before concentrating on activities in the community and voluntary sector, and she believes passionately, as I believe everyone here does, in challenging the hard to see discrimination that arises when so many decisions are based on viewing life through the lens of the dominant groups in society. So I think we can all agree that Imogen and Susannah are bona fide dyed in the wool, whatever that term is, GFPs. We're going to find out what they did with that GFP lust for changing things. So first of all, I'd just love to know, how did you two meet? Had you known each other for a long time before starting Make Space for Girls?
Simple answer, yes. We first met at university, which was an inordinately long time ago now, apparently. And then we our careers took us in very separate directions. I stayed in London and Susannah moved all over the country in a much more exciting way. We started to reconnect, I suppose, probably in our late 40s, something like that. Just chatting about life, the universe and everything. So we'd known each other for quite a long time. We never worked together. So this is kind of interesting. Yeah.
Interesting in a good way?
Interesting in a good way.
Because it's always nerve-wracking working with friends, isn't it?
It is. And it is working in a good way. Yes.
Good.
It's amusing sometimes on both parts.
Oh, really? Do we want to hear about that, or is it best to draw a veil over that? Okay, draw a veil over that one. So could you explain for those viewers, or if you explain to someone who'd never heard of Make Space for Girls, didn't know anything about it, or the issues that you try to address, what is it that you do?
Okay, Make Space for Girls is a campaigning charity. It was set up to campaign to make parks and similar public spaces as welcoming to teenage girls as they are to teenage boys. And I'll let Susannah talk a little bit about, why did we end up, what was the catalyst for doing this? But we can see that parks in particular tend to have multi-use games areas, skate parks, BMX tracks, and ball courts, things like that, which are dominated by boys, which doesn't mean that girls can't skateboard. If you think about the skills that are needed for skateboarding, actually gym is a really good foundation skill. But despite this, girls aren't on the skate parks. Girls are really good footballers, but you don't see girls knocking a ball around on a Muga. A lot of girls play netball, but you hardly ever see a netball hoop or the netball court set out in one of these fenced pitches. So that's what we are campaigning to try and change.
For those people who don't know, what is a Muga?
A Muga is a multi-use games area, which is a lovely euphemism because it's basically for kicking a ball around on. So this multi-use games area suggests you might have snakes and ladders and other joyful things in there, but you don't. It's for kicking a ball around it. And you see them everywhere. They're the ones that have the sort of the wire around them, and they generally have a basketball hoop each end because goals are difficult to maintain and get nicked. And they are generally full of boys and young men playing football or basketball.
Right. So why is it that girls need spaces designed specifically for them? Why can't we just encourage more girls to play football or to skateboard?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why we should be doing this, including just basic equity. There's a really important health reason for doing this. Teenage girls have incredibly low activity levels, and everyone is very worried about this, but nobody ever quite puts the two and two together and goes, but we haven't given them anything to be active on. There is a legal duty that councils and public bodies have under the public sector equality duty, which is that they have to consider equality in making their decisions. It doesn't mean it doesn't set out what they have to do as a result of it, but it has to be part of their decision-making process, which clearly, when you look at quite a lot of parks and public spaces, hasn't been happening. As to why things have to change is that there's a lot of reasons why parks don't work for girls at the moment. Some of that is to do with safety, but some of it is to do with the way that boys tend to dominate an area and to take over skate parks and to take over multi-use games areas. And some of it is to do with the fact that nobody's ever asked girls what they might want to find in a park, or at least not in this country. A few places have.
Well, on that note then, what places have asked, what have they found, and what have they done as a result?
Well, the best example is Vienna, who they had a policy of gender mainstreaming, which everyone's read the book, you all know about this, they're great. But as part of this, they did some pilot work on parks, particularly Einsiedler Park, and they did a lot of things. A lot of it, they said, safety, making sure that there's a perimeter path around a park, because a path that goes in two directions is much safer because you can always turn around and go the other way. Places that aren't dead ends, better lighting. But they also broke up their fenced pitch. They separated into two areas. So if the boys were dominating one half, there's still space for another group to do something else. They also, because multi-use games areas are not great for girls because they're fenced. They've got narrow openings. Boys stand around in the openings. It doesn't feel like a place you'd want to go into. So they moved one of the walls away, opened it up, put extra entrance and exits in, and generally thought about how to make it more appealing to girls. But there are also the possibilities of actually just building stuff that girls like, one of which is swings. Teenage girls love swings, and there's always two swings, and they're fenced in the toddlers' play area. So if the girls go on the swings, the parents go, teenagers getting in the way. And so there's a really simple thing of just build lots of swings and don't fence them in with the rest of the toddler play equipment.
Do you know, why is it that girls like swings? Has anyone done any research on that? Do boys not like swings? Or young men, teenagers, male teenagers?
I think the answer is probably some do, because although we call ourselves Make Space for Girls, there is the point that the current provision caters for a particular type of young masculinity, and not all boys conform to that gender stereotype. and there are teenagers who don't want to conform to either particular gender stereotype in terms of boy or girl. So although we call ourselves Make Space for Girls, and we are a committedly feminist organisation, it has to be recognised that the provision that's being made at the moment only caters for a relatively narrow range of boys. And nobody's ever asked that question. Nobody's ever actually said, well, you know, approximately how many boys really want a skate park? No one's done that research. But, you know, I did some really quick maths, and I looked at the fact that 85% of skateboarders are men, 80% of skateboarders are under 18. And I looked at the number of 18-year-olds there were, and the fact that there are 750,000 skaters in the UK. You put all that together and you reckon that about 15 to 17% of teenage boys are skateboarders. It's really quite a minority. I'm not saying it's a, you know, it's less than a fifth of boys skateboard. So, you know, you're actually catering for a really small percentage. And yeah, there may be quite a lot of boys who would like to sit around on a swing and chat to their mates. But, I mean, they're given even less of a chance of doing that than girls are.
Yes, but I think one of the things about swings is the social thing. Girls really like to be able to do things in the park socially. So there's a great example that we've only ever heard about as a rumour and still yet to go and find. But in North Bristol, apparently, they've arranged exercise bikes like the spokes of a wheel, so that girls can sit on them, exercise and chat at the same time. And apparently, the whole thing is just teeming with teenage girls all the time. So something where you can be social and be out is one of the things that teenage girls really like.
And well, have you got any sort of examples that you can share, maybe show us, of what a good space design for girls might look like, so we can get a visual idea?
We'll have a go at getting the images up, but on our Twitter feed, the pinned tweet is a list of suggestions of here are some ideas of just what spaces for girls might work, you know, and a lot of it is about creating things that don't tell you what to do. What's interesting about what's provided for teenagers at the moment is that it's very like, here is a skate park, skate on it, here is a football pitch, play football in it, and actually a space that you can interact with creatively and clamber on and hang out isn't that difficult to make. But it's all very, you know, do this, rather than just like, oh, here's a space for teenagers, just do something with it.
So I've just seen a very sad message from one of the viewers, Nicola, saying, on the multi-use game areas, my football loving girl has given up trying to join in with pickup football games in the park. She's always chucked out or ignored by the boys playing. She plays for a girls team, so it's not that she's rubbish, just not given a chance to prove herself, which is basically what you're saying, isn't it?
And that there's some, you know, some really depressing research which was done. I can't remember the professor.
Carrie Pachter.
Thank you, Carrie Pachter did some really depressing research in 2 primary schools in London, and looked at how the children and the teachers interacted when it came to playing kickabout football in the playground and playing organised football, and the different ways that the teachers treated the girls playing football to how they were treating the boys, and how they tolerated the boys' response to basically, well, the girls shouldn't really be playing football anyway. Do you know what I mean? And so by the time you get to the end of primary school, a lot of boys have learnt the lesson that they can occupy the playground with their football, and the girls will make themselves nice and small and fit around the edges. And they've learnt that by the end of primary school. And so that will carry on into secondary school as well. That, you know, and so the boys have learnt, we have this terrific right to take up this play space and do what we want in it. And that's just how it is. And they probably don't, it's not meant nastily, it's just an accepted right that they have learnt that they have, in the same way that the girls have learnt we'll lurk around the edges, but wishing we had our phones, But of course, at the end of primary school, they're not allowed their phones, but they're wishing they had their phones. And that's just so sad.
I think the other thing about that as well is that there's a really important thing that Eva Kyle, who led the gender mainstreaming program in Vienna, said. And she says, we have to design for the society we have now, not for the one that we'd like to be. And it would be great if we could teach boys not to do that. But that's a serious long-term project that is actually beyond the scope of us as a charity. Whereas what you can do is design spaces that don't allow boys to dominate them, because that's where we are now. And the same thing happens with skate parks. They if it's one big huge bowl, it becomes like a coliseum of boy skateboarders, and girls don't, for very good reasons, don't want to go and be part of that, and they don't feel they're good enough to be part of that. So if you break up these spaces, that you can to some degree counteract that. There's a woman who did some research in New Zealand who calls it territorialization.
And I mean, this is one of the things that we're very sort of passionate about, is that we need to implement design solutions to this. It is no good keeping to produce exactly the same stuff and then going, oh, but what we really need is some skateboard lessons for girls.
Let's fix the girls.
You know, and we have had a number of conversations. You know, there was an epic conversation with a gentleman who introduced himself as having been in charge of parks in this area for 29 years. And there wasn't a single park or recreational area that he hadn't supervised the design of. So he really knew what he was talking about. And I did not say, so it's all your fault, Derek. Although I was very tempted to say that. And we listened to him as he said, no, you see, the thing is, ladies, there's nothing wrong with the design. There's nothing wrong with the design. What we need to do is we need to have more skateboarding lessons for girls, because we did that in the 90s and we did that in the noughties, didn't we? And we said, yes, Derek. And did that work? No. Then he said, well, let's not talk about skate parks. Let's not talk about skate parks are too difficult. He said, they're too difficult. We've got plenty of other team provision. We've got plenty, as I said, that's terrific, Derek, really good. So on your other team provision, have we got lots of teenage girls? No, we haven't got that. So we're having another meeting with that council, and we're sort of hoping that Derek's going to be disinvited, because to be honest, he wasn't very helpful. But there is a lot of, let's fix the girls by turning them into little boys. And we're very passionate that no, if girls want to skateboard, we have to create design solutions that allow them to do that, and which counteract the territorialization that boys exhibit. And just giving them skateboard lessons and saying, well, there you go,
get on with it,
get into that bowl, it's just not going to work.
And these skate parks already do exist in the UK as well. This is not some fantasy land. There are a couple of really good examples of skate parks that work in this way, that have lots of different areas, that encourage people from beginners up to more difficult things. They're there. It's not a problem.
Right. Where are these skate parks?
Oxhay Park in Watford is the huge one. That's the big flagship that has lots of areas. But there's also a little one in Lincolnshire that was done in conjunction with the local council, that it's done for £60,000.
And have they? Has there been research on the gender split?
Well, Oxhay Park opened in lockdown. There's another park up in Nottingham, Rushcliffe, which was designed with the input of young women and girls, and that opened April, so just post-lockdown. Apparently they had some granite and it got stuck in the Suez Canal.
Yes, in the boat that got stuck. So
but anyway, it eventually got unstuck and they got their granite, so that was good. So it's very early days, and what we have been trying to bully people who are involved in those parks to do is to collect some blooming data, because what they tell us is, look, these parks are different because we designed these parks talking to teenage girls and engaging with them. And so we're really keen that somebody collects some blooming data about this, because having done it, it would be great. But I say, to their, in their defense, they both opened very, very recently.
Right.
I think this is worth in something that will come as no surprise to anybody on this call. There is no data, and that is one of the things we're trying to fix. It's not just that there's gender disaggregated data missing, it's just not there at all. We keep building Muggers. There is genuinely one piece of research about Muggers, and that's about doing youth work in them. Nobody has ever even just gone, who uses them? How do they use them? But we'll build 10,000 of them anyway. There's a little bit of research on skateboarding, but there is almost no data on who uses parks and who doesn't. So I'm really pleased to say that one of the things we've already managed to do is we're working with Yorkshire Sport, and they've got some money from Sport England, and they're just putting out tenders, and some councils, hopefully with budgets to then change things, are going to do some basic level research on who's using parks, which is going to take us so much further forward.
Very, very good. I'm going to do a clapping emoji.
Did
that work? Did that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Yay! I think that's very impressive. And I'm aware that I've got so many questions. I'm on like question 4 of 16, and I have 6 minutes left. So I'm probably going to skip some questions. Because one of the things that I really wanted from this talk is I really want to talk about what you're doing, but I think that probably there are going to be questions from the audience about that, and I want to leave time for that. So the other thing that I wanted to get from this was, it's amazing what you've done, that you had this moment of seeing the park and getting annoyed, and now you've set up a whole charity and you're doing research and you're getting councils to fund research, which is incredible and awe-inspiring and probably a bit intimidating. So I thought it would be interesting I certainly feel intimidated by it. There's a lot of work to do. How did you do this? What made you decide to go from I'm pissed off to actually now I'm going to do something about this? Actually, now this is going to not just be my own council, but it's going to be UK wide. Actually, I'm going to set up a whole charity.
Okay.
First, sort of, how did that happen? And also, I think, like, what do you have advice to give people who also might be spotting something in their local area, or more broadly, that annoys them, and they don't know how to go about changing it?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that made it worthwhile for us was the fact that I took the outrage and I started talking to Imogen about that, and because her background's in law, we became aware that it wasn't just wouldn't it be nice if you did this? It's like, actually, you've got a legal obligation to think about this, is a much sterner thing to approach people with. So we saw that we had something that had the possibility of making effect. Also, it's a very clear area, and it's very clear that there is a huge problem in this very small area, and so it felt like something that was fixable. I also think that it was just the right timing. That there's been so much going on with Me Too, with what happened in Clapham. It's that the door was already open. And how I think we've got a lucky mix of legal skills and my background in sort of communications and TV and having done social media for stuff before really helped. Mostly, though, how it's gone so fast.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
we started off, as I say, obviously, massive respect, Caroline, because it was your book that started it off. Yes. We both obviously read it. I had not focused on the bit on parks because I was too busy being angry about so many other things that, and also my daughter is 23 and isn't in the parks anymore. So, I read that bit, but it didn't necessarily, but Susannah, it did really resonate because the town she lives in has exactly that triumvirate of multi-use games area, skate park, and pump track, and nothing there for the teenage girls at all.
And I approached the council and they said, oh, we don't think of gender when we're doing our play equipment. And I went, yes, clearly that's the problem.
So Susannah and I got chatting and I said, why don't we ask the council how they've complied with the public sector equality duty? Because I'm a lawyer and I think complying with the law is a really good thing. I've just got this thing, I don't know. Anyway, so I said, let's go and see how they've complied with the public sector equality duty. So I wrote them a lovely letter, lovely legal letter.
What I'm getting from this is it's really useful to have a lawyer as a
anyway, wrote this lovely letter. They came back and went, public sector what now? Yes, really, absolutely. It's fine. Don't worry about it, love, sort of thing. And it was the most bizarre reaction. I thought this just can't be right. And we started to look more into this and realised that, for some reason, the public sector equality duty in the field of planning and park design does not seem to be thought about very much. And it should, because it's the law. We set up a charity because it seemed to us that it fell absolutely within a charitable objective. You know, we are trying to promote equality. The Charity Commission has very clear guidance about what counts as charitable and what doesn't. We felt it definitely did. So that's why we set up the charity. So, you know, and in terms of what, you know, if you see a burning injustice in your, you know, that you feel really strongly about, I think what we'd say is, one, do your research, because it's really easy for people to turn around and say, oh, you've got it wrong. And when I say people, obviously I mean mostly men, who you will say to them, there is this problem. And they will come back to you with, well, no, because there's lots of girls on my local skate park. You've got that wrong.
How many councils have a magic skate park that really beats all of them? And it's 50-50 girls and boys. Always very strange.
So, you know, I think, so having done your research so that you absolutely know when you are met with the skeptical man who says, oh, I just don't, why are we having to bring gender into it? You know, my daughter loves playing football. What is your problem? That you've got the data there because you've done the research and you know more about the area than they do. And you can go back and you can say, well, Skateboard GB says 80% of skateboarders are men.
Yeah.
So you may have, you know, you may have your views on it all being equal, but the data that there is says no. You know, oh, you know, girls, I see girls playing on the multi-use games area all the time. Do you ever see them when they're not in an organised team with an adult there? Oh, no. Yeah. So do your research, because that gives you the confidence to actually knock back the people who are all around who don't want to recognise that there is a gender issue, because it's really much more comfortable if they don't recognise there's a gender issue. So do your research, be really cross about something. That does help. I mean, really being cross about something. I
love it. In so many meetings, people say, oh, you two are so enthusiastic. And I'm sitting there going, this is actually the white hot rage of feminism. But hey, if you want to read it as enthusiasm, you can take that.
Yes, you can take that. So research, know what you want to change, and know who you, try and work out who you need to talk to change it. And, you know, think about who your allies are going to be, and also think about it from the other side. So it's all very well just talking to and thinking about things from your allies' point of view, but also think about, well, the people who don't want this, what are their arguments going to be for why this shouldn't happen? And what are my arguments back to them about why, in the nicest possible sense, they're wrong? So I think those are the things to think about. We were lucky in that we had a bit of time in lockdown before we launched the charity to do quite a bit of thinking.
Yeah, I think doing the research also just convinced us that there was something there in the first place. You know, that we didn't just fire in. We spent a good 6 months, and then one of the first things we did was put this out as a research document, going, this is why we think there's a problem, and that saved a lot of explaining.
And I spent an awful lot of time digging under every stone to find out if there was actually a legitimate reason why people were ignoring the public sector equality duty when it came to planning. Because I kept thinking, maybe there's some little regulation somewhere that I don't know about. Maybe there's some reason why this is not being looked. And so I spent a lot of time, you know, turning over every little stone to say, well, is it here? No, is that? No. But no, you know, it should be complied with, and it just isn't really.
And I think the other thing is, you know, yes, we are reasonably competent, but you don't have to be geniuses. There's a lot of people bumbling along just doing things because they've done them the way that they always have done.
Derek.
Hello, Derek. Yes, I'm still
Oh, Derek.
No, Derek, honestly, my eyes roll so hard they really fell out of my head.
We feel no pity for Derek.
But I think just you only have to be reasonably competent to be able to make a difference. You know, if you're focused on, because lots of people are, you know, they've got a lot of things to deal with. But if you've got a clear point that you're making, and you've got, you know, and you can put it across, and you know your onions, then, you know, that's really what it boils down to.
Well, that I think is a very good point to open to the audience. if you have a question, can you raise your hand? I have a bit of a problem that I need to go across 3 screens for some reason. It's like 3.
Ooh, yes, you can go. There's a little thing there. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, yes, gosh.
Isn't that exciting? Anyway, because if no one has any questions, I will just carry on asking my own questions. If you have a question, if you've raised your hand and I haven't noticed because you're on the wrong screen, not the wrong screen, but just a screen where I can't see you because I'm going to stop going backwards and forwards now, then maybe put it in the chat. I don't know if raising your hand puts you to the front of the queue, as it were. Anyway, whatever. Rena says it does. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. You can tell I'm an expert at hosting Zoom chats. Well, when you sort of mentioned about, you know, thinking about the arguments of the people who are not pro what it might be that you're trying to do, I mean, what kind of criticism have you faced?
I think there's a piece around why are you bringing gender into this? Aren't we beyond all that? Because this perception, oh, you know, we even allow girls football on telly these days. So I think there's a reluctance to allow considerations of gender to come into that. That's one thing. There's also people don't like to think about the fact they've just spent £400,000 on a new skate park without actually thinking too hard about whether that's quite a sexist provision. You know, it's not comfortable. So I think some of the reaction that we get, and when you get the reaction about, well, we spent all this money, then you get into let's fix the girls arguments, and it becomes very much, well, you know, it's just a question of persuading the girls to overcome these invisible barriers and they'll all be on the skate parks and things like that. So I think that's one of the sort of criticisms. How do you deal with it? I think I think part of it is finding the people who are interested in what you're trying to do and working with them, because you're not going to convince somebody who genuinely doesn't think gender is an issue, because it's a bit like the people who say, well, you know, there's no racism in the UK. You're never really going to convince them that they're wrong about that. All you can do is work with allies to find a way round them, perhaps.
I think one of the things we've also learned is, and I think this is sort of quite important for how the campaigning works, is as well as telling people what's wrong, the accentuating the positive. Yeah. So we've got there's the case studies from Vienna, and also there's a great park designed by teenage girls in Sweden, and there's some Swedish architects who've done some work on making skate parks better. So rather than just going everything's horrible, you're all wrong, is just saying, here are some ideas. Here are some quite cheap things that you could do to attract girls to parks. Here is a list of solutions, and putting out lots of positivity. And so also then working with the people who do want to do something, because I think one of the things that makes our life much easier is that there are a heck of a lot of councils and a heck of a lot of parks. So you can, we're just about to start working with the park in Bath, where they've got some money from a funding thing. They want to improve the youth provision and they want to work with us and talk to teenage girls. And that's fantastic. And then when that happens, we'll really make a fuss about it, because you say, look, this is how you do it.
Sorry, were you going to say something, Imogen?
I've just seen a question in the chat from Stephen about any views on what density of spaces are needed. Are girls prepared to travel, say, 500 meters, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers to a space for them? Does this differ from boys? I don't think anybody's done any research on that at all. I mean, obviously, post-pandemic, there is a lot of focus on the 15-minute neighborhood. I've never been entirely clear whether when people say the 15-minute neighborhood, they mean 15-minute cycle ride or 15 minutes walk, because of course, those are two very different things. But no, I mean, nobody's done any research on that. And linking to another question, which I think, well, somebody said, what's the link between that and girls and active travel? When you're talking to girls about why they don't perhaps use a park, routes to the park are obviously an important part of that. Is there a safe route to the park? And we were talking, I can't remember whether it was someone in, I think it might have been someone in Leeds who'd done a consultation with young girls in a place in the park, and we're very pleased about having done that, except that one of the young girls had her phone nicked on the way to the consultation and arrived utterly traumatized. And the woman was going, I felt so bad because if only I'd done the consultation somewhere else, she wouldn't have been mugged for her phone, you know, to which the answer wasn't kind of your fault. But I think safe routes to parks is a very important part of making the park accessible. You can have the most beautiful park, brilliantly designed, but if the only way to get to it is through a hideous underpass, which feels very unsafe, you've wasted your time and your money.
We've got a couple of raised hands here. So I'm going to go to Suzanne, who put her hand up first. So Suzanne, could you unmute yourself?
Hello, it's been really interesting listening to you three. It's been brilliant. One thing that occurred to me is I've just taken up yoga and I need some new exercise kit. So I went onto Amazon and I compared the photos of the women in their exercise kit and the photos of the men in their exercise kit. With the women was all cleavage, it was all sexy poses. Do you think the sexualization of sport is also something that puts women off doing activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we'd say is we're very much about play rather than sport. And women in sport have done some very interesting research because they're also quite about play, interestingly enough, because sport is seen in very competitive terms, as you say. It's seen in very sexual terms. You have to, as a teenager, squish your body into an outfit which may not be an outfit that you're particularly comfortable with. You know, you're out there, and as you say, you know, Suzanne, you're very much on display when you are playing sport. Whatever sport it is, you are on display, and it's a way to fail. Whereas what we're saying with play is a lot like loitering, lurking, goofing off. It's self-directed. And if you want to do it in a large overcoat with a hat pulled down over your ears, wearing Timberland boots, that's how you can play. And it's, you know, you can play wearing whatever you like. Whereas
that's so interesting. It's just making me think about how I used to hate getting changed into my gym kit at school. It just felt uncomfortable. This little skirt you had to wear with the big knickers.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just my school. Eva has asked a question. So Eva, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Hi. I'm 13, so I know that I've been experiencing, your talk's been really interesting, thank you. And I know I definitely feel like I'm relating to it. But I wanted to ask about within schools, whether you've done any research or any work within schools, because there's definitely, within schools, there is a 50-50 split of people who are going to be in the playground, and yet still it's very male dominated.
There's an organisation, it's a really, really interesting question, because what happens in the school playground so often, you know, it's, as Imogen said before, it sets boys' expectations about what happens. There's a really brilliant organisation who already does this work, and they're called OPAL, which is Outdoor Play and Learning. And they're run by Michael Follett, who's done 20 years work in this area, and he works with schools to take the focus off football and to create spaces that work for everybody. And if you have a look at their website, they've got some really interesting examples. So if you wanted to change your school, they would be the people to talk to, because they work predominantly in primary, but they do work in secondary schools as well. And they know all about it. And their work is really interesting, because one of the things that comes out is that there are, depending on who you believe, between 13 and 16 different kinds of play, ways in which it's possible to play. And yet school playgrounds really only cater for one of those, which is locomotive play. So the boys are dominating the area with locomotive play, and girls are basically not being given space to express their need for all these other different kinds of play. So it's possible that one of the problems with parks is that girls simply have not learned to play, not been given the opportunities to experiment with play that they could then take out into the parks. So, so we don't do this simply because there is somebody else who really knows their stuff, who's doing it really well. But we've had fascinating conversations with him, and we've learned a lot from him, and we've taken some of their ideas into our own work. But yes, we don't need to work in schools because they're there.
There's a few questions in the chat that I'm just going to ask. So Mandy is a co-founder of a charity herself, noting that long-term sustainability is hard to achieve, especially during COVID and the economic crisis. And she's wondering about your fundraising and how you have been going about that, which ties into a question I wanted to ask you as well, which is, I'm sure there are a lot of people on this event, chat, webinar, whatever, who would love to support what you're doing. So if you could also sort of talk about how they can support you either financially or in any other way.
In terms of fundraising, it's a very difficult landscape at the moment for any charity trying to fundraise. We've been fortunate in that a lot of the campaigning work at the moment, Susannah and I are doing ourselves on an entirely voluntary basis. At some stage that will need to be cut back as things like, needing to earn a bit of money starts to raise its ugly head again. But we've been fortunate in that we have got the space at the moment for various reasons to put a lot of time in ourselves. In terms of fundraising, we apply to as many small trusts as we can. One of the problems we have right now is that a lot of trusts require 1 year's worth of accounts before they'll even look at you. So for example, the Rosen Trust, which would be perfect for us because that looks at issues that are specific to women, they would be brilliant. And they've even launched a campaigning trust, a campaigning pot, but we don't have a year's worth of accounts. So there are some sort of quite specific difficulties with fundraising at the moment, but there are small pots out there that we use, and what we spend our money on is the expertise to do things like consultations with teenage girls. That's where, because we are not, we know that teenage girls have to be consulted with, but we are not experts on doing consultation.
Yes, I think the other thing is we're trying to stay quite nimble, and we kind of work like a parasite charity in that we suck onto somebody else who's very good at doing what they're doing, like with the Yorkshire sport work, where we can have an input, but then they can take on that whole fundraising, running and monitoring the work that gets done. And we're also looking at working with a couple of sets of academics, because it's glorious. Academics go, there's no research, that's a fantastic opportunity, I can write a funding bid for that. And so we're working with people where we're fundraising. As Imogen said, it's about doing the consultations, because a lot of councils they may have a certain capital pot to do the work on the park, but if we can chip in with just a bit of money to create a decent consultation with the girls, that's where we think our money is best spent. And we've been lucky enough to get a couple of grants already for that, and that's where we're sort of putting our efforts. So yes, so we have a GoFundMe page which Caroline's got the link to, and that's basically what we're fundraising for at the moment, because we've got one project that's definitely gone live in Bath, and 3 or 4 more where our input will be to work with an organisation that works with teenage girls and create very specific long-form consultations. Because one thing is, you can't just go and ask teenage girls what they want, because they've never had it. It's not like you ask teenage girls, oh, I want a BMX track, I want a skate park. Because girls have never had anything, you need to actually spend some time with them, working out what they need from their particular park and what will work for them. And that can quite often, in some bits, be very culturally specific, it's specific to the area. You can't just go and write, here is the girls' tick list of stuff, we've delivered it, boom, and expect to solve the problem. So that's why we want to fund several of these longer consultations to try and answer that question.
That's really interesting about it not being enough to just ask the girls, because they've never had it, so how can they possibly know what they want, which is sort of depressing, but interesting. We're nearly out of time, but Rena has had her hand up for a while, so I'm going to take one more question. Yes, you've unmuted yourself, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Great conversation. I'm also keen to hear a little bit about the research about the boys. And you alluded to this earlier when you said that not all boys want to play football, not all boys want to have skate parks. And I think it would be quite helpful to also have some data about the other boys who want to do something other than what the mainstream boy does. And it also will help develop a different element, a different sort of environment for them. And maybe you can strengthen the case for spaces that are different from the mainstream. Is there anything that you're aware of that's being done there? Or maybe
no, I mean, this is philosophically very interesting, because there is a very significant part of what we do that basically just says, no, bother it, we are about making space for girls. That is, you know, that is what makes us get up in the morning and do this, you know. Yes, so there's that side of us, but there is the other side that also says, no, but you know, it is better if we make space better for boys as well, the non-sporty boys. So there's nobody's really researching into that at the moment. There was an interesting piece of work done by Julia King at the LSE in around Wembley, when she had a developer who came along and said, right, teenage provision, I'm going to stick in a skate park, job done. And she said, whoa, wait, why don't we talk to some of the local youth about this? And they produced some really interesting research called
Seen and Heard.
Seen and Heard.
And you can find it, there's a link to that on our website on the consultation page. We've got examples of good consultations, and that's a really excellent one.
And what was interesting was it was a mixed group. It wasn't an all-girl group, it was a mixed group, but only one of them actually wanted a skate park. And so I think if you do individual consultations with groups of boys and girls, you will get a much more nuanced message about what they want, compared to if you just go out and say, let's build a skate park, what do you think? And I saw a really interesting, a council said, oh, we're thinking of building a skate park. What does everybody think? And they sort of put it out on a channel. I can't remember which channel it was. And there was lots of people going in and saying, terrific idea. I've always thought we should do something for the youth. Yeah. I think skateboarding looks awfully exciting. I'd love to do it, but I'm in my 80s. You know, endless comments, utterly lacking any rooting in what teenagers want. But the response to the council went, oh, we've got loads of lovely positivity around the idea of a skate park. And you think, but look who's... And it was this idea that everyone was so terribly keen to do something for the youth. And I suppose if you roll back 20 years, everyone would have said, oh, let's build them a youth centre and they could play ping pong. Well, we've moved on from that. Now the equivalent of let's build them a youth centre and let them play ping pong is let's build them a skate park, because that's terrific for the young people. It's marvellous. They'll love it. You know, no, talk to the young people, ask them what they want. And listen, don't say, would you like a skate park?
I think the other thing is that there's an axiom in sort of planning that a neighbourhood that works for children works for everybody. And I think a park that works for teenage girls doesn't disadvantage anybody and benefits a lot of other people. It benefits boys who don't want to belong. Also because it's a safer, more frequented park with a greater mix of people. Older people feel more comfortable in it. If it's got better toilets, then young mums can use it more easily.
Yes.
But it's just, if it works for teenage girls, it works for everybody and nobody loses.
Mm-hmm. Well, what an amazing note to end on. It's almost like you planned it. Thank you so much, Imogen and Susannah. That was absolutely fascinating. And thank you so much, everyone who came along. And I'm so sorry again for not understanding how Zoom links work, apparently. But next time I'll be better. Just a quick reminder, in the email I sent out with the probably incorrect Zoom details, there is a correct link to Susannah and Imogen's Just Giving page. So if you'd like to donate, you can donate there. I'll also include a link in next week's newsletter. Other than that, Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Hope
Thank
you have a lovely
you.
day.
Bye.
And yeah, see you next time. Bye.